Before this meeting are familiar with the word permaculture? Okay, quite a bit. So, that doesn't make me nervous at all. Okay, so if you know about permaculture, you know that basically every single permaculturalist you'll ask has kind of a different definition for what permaculture is. There's lots of different definitions for permaculture. This is a definition out of the dictionary. So, an agricultural system or method that seeks to integrate human activity with natural surroundings, so as to create highly efficient, self-sustaining ecosystems. So as I mentioned earlier, we are providing for our environment and for wildlife, and we're also providing for people. And one of the founders of permaculture, Bill Mollison, along with David Halter, his student, he has a really good definition. So, working with rather than against nature. To me, like, that is the simplest thing that you could possibly think of, and it works. And you'll find that permaculture is very simple, and sometimes I'm like, this stuff is so simple, I don't know, if I should be teaching these things, but I found that in our society today, we tend to overcomplicate things, and sometimes the most simple answers, we can't find them. They're right in front of our face, but everything has to be really complex, right? Protracted and thoughtful observation rather than protracted and thoughtless labor. So thinking about something really hard and observing, out of Leopold, make sure you're doing your observations. And instead of doing all of this work beforehand that you're going to have to undo because you made a mistake because you weren't paying attention to the way things were flowing in your landscape. Looking at plants and animals in all of their functions, rather than treating any area as a single product system. So we'll go into that a little bit as we go on with the presentation. So yeah, permaculture can still be like a taboo word for some people, or it's like, what is that? Is that some hippie stuff, or I don't know what that is. Here are some other fields where you'll find permaculture-like ideas being utilized. Agroforestry, that's, the USDA is getting into the stuff. Restoration agriculture, we're going to have a class on restoration agriculture coming up soon, so stay tuned. Regenerative design, the Sustainable Sites Initiative, that's an excellent example of some of these concepts going into the mainstream. And agroecology. Here are some places you might find people practicing permaculture nowadays. Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, Texas A&M, USDA, Civil and Nature Center is where the Restoration Agriculture workshop is going to be taking place, and Eldridge is awesome. Various gardening initiatives around the city. The Community Gardens program is implementing more permaculture into their gardens, and various universities around the country. I believe it's the University of Michigan. They have a really awesome permaculture. So it's not just for hippies anymore. So, basic premise of permaculture, 3 ethics: care of the earth, taking care of people, as Michelle mentioned earlier, and returning the surplus. And returning the surplus is kind of like a highly debated permaculture ethic, but you can basically sum it up in limiting yourself and making sure that you're only taking as much as you need, and that you're also you're investing back into your system, back into your community, and you're taking care of yourself, and you're taking care of what you can take care of. You're obtaining. So, designing to meet human needs while preserving ecosystem health. That's from Toby Hemingway, who wrote Gaia's Garden. So, we're going to go over some principles to keep in mind. This by no means is an extensive list of permaculture principles. There's actually at least 2 sets, one from David Holmgren and one from Bill Mollison. And we're going to kind of tie this in eventually into native plants, I promise, and into creating your own guild, your own permaculture guild out of native plants. Observe and interact. Utilize relative location and integrate rather than segregate. Stack functions. Obtain a yield and produce no waste. So observe and interact. Most important thing you can do. Sit back, relax, and take it all in. They say that, and I know this is really hard. It's really hard for me too. Do what I say and not what I do, right? But they say that you're supposed to sit and observe your land for at least a year before you do any major gardening or landscaping projects. And the reason for this, so back to Bill Mulch, protracted and thoughtful observation. The reason for this is so that you can see what flows are coming in and off of your property, right? Because you want to make sure that you're catching water where it's flowing. You want to make sure that you're not interrupting pathways that you use every day. You want to make sure that you know where animals are coming on and off your land. You want to chart the sun going across the sky and where its shadows are. Let's see, what else do we have on here? You want to see where there's noise pollution coming in from a dog barking. Maybe I can put up a evergreen hedge there, right? So this is an example of a sector map, and you're marking all of those different flows that are going on and off your land. Let's see. Yeah, so we got there's water coming down this way. You have your summer sun going across the sky, your winter sun. You have, there's little footprints. It's hard to see because it's really far away, but there's little footprints, so they're showing where people are walking. You're showing where wind is blowing. All these good things to keep in mind when designing a landscape. Okay, another good observation to make is to figure out all the different elements that you have in your garden currently, or your landscape, and also think about the ones that you want to integrate into your life. So this is a classic permaculture chicken. It's really easy to figure out all those different inputs and outputs that a chicken can produce. Now basically you're going to be doing this input-output analysis for every element in your system. And the reason for that is because you want to put these things in a certain way in your design so that the waste of one element will be the energy source for another. So let's see if we can kind of take this apart right now. So the rainwater is coming off the roof here, and instead of just letting it flow off the property, they're doing a few things with it, right? They're building an outdoor shower, and the gray water from that, or would that be considered black water? Gray water. That's going into a little basin right here to water this tree, which is providing shade for this person. You don't want any of these products and resources to be wasted. You want to utilize everything that's coming in to your property before it leaves.
Solar PV on the roof.
Yeah, you got your solar energy coming in. There's stacking functions. We're going to talk about stacking functions. Well, I can talk about stacking functions. Yeah. So basically, one element is doing several things, right? This house is providing shelter, it's catching rainwater, and it's also catching solar energy. Let's say that this is the south right here, right? So you have solar energy coming in all winter and all summer. And maybe on the west side you would place a tree to block the west sun. So you're just kind of keeping all of these things in mind, and you're trying to design a system where it's a cycle, and it's not a linear exit off of your land. Yeah, so integrate rather than segregate. On the left here, you see it's an organic garden. It's really awesome, right? But this is where native plant people really like this because, not only are we just having like a native vegetable or a regular old vegetable garden, we're going to put some native plants in here to attract pollinators and to provide, for medicine. And we're also going to find native plants to provide food for wildlife. There's also several native goes down this way. So I have my rabbits up here, and I have some chickens over here off to this side. And basically, so whenever it rains, whatever waste they're producing, it's creating this really nutrient-rich compost tea that's going down the hill, and it's watering my beds below, which are right here, and on this side too, I have some beds. And whatever water is coming down the hill, on this side, I didn't take a picture, but just imagine, use your imaginations. There are some berms to catch that water, and I'm planting within the berms. Okay, so the reason we're doing this is, like I said, you don't want to produce any waste. If you have an abundance of pollution in your design, if you don't have a snail problem, you have a duck deficiency. That's a quote from Bill Mollison. And the problem is the solution. So basically what's happening is, instead of figuring out what the solution is, what you need to integrate into that design to feed off of this, what you would think of as pollution, a lot of people consider this pollution. This is waste. That's not waste. That's mulch. So you're bagging this stuff up, and then you're going to the gardening supply store, picking up, and you're doing all of this work, and you're not getting as much of a yield from it because you're having to put all of this energy into getting things from off-site instead of utilizing what you have on-site already. So in other words, one element's trash is another element's treasure. Okay, so a way of using relative location and integrating instead of segregating is integrated plantings. So we're talking about plant guilds here. We're trying to combine different plants together to work off of each other and to cooperate with each other and to be mutually beneficial. So you can have different plants that provide different functions. You can have plants that create mulch, plants that find nutrients, plants that fix nitrogen, plants that create soil cover. There's all sorts of different functions that plants can do for you. And you want to make sure that you're creating this family in the system to where there's at least something taking care of each responsibility in this guild. So you can also stack plants vertically. And this is the 7 layers of a food forest. You have your canopy or your tall tree layer, your understory, low tree layer. You have your shrubs, your herbaceous layer, the ground cover that protects the soil. You have vines to take advantage of vertical growing space. And you have a root layer. And not only can roots be a source of food, but they can also provide for breaking up hard soils and for mining nutrients that other plants with shallower roots can't get to. So in doing this and creating the forest garden, we're basically taking a page from nature's book. We're mimicking the process of succession. So we have our pioneer plants like our wildflowers, the ones that are the first on site to start restoring the habitat and restoring the soil. You can see over here we have very little soil, but by the time we get to the climax species over here, we have all of the soil built up from all the organic matter that these guys are mining and creating. So we want to mimic that process in our designs. So another way to increase yield is to stack functions. So as we saw in that example with the roof, all the different things that roof was providing for, plants are perfect examples of doing this already, of nature knowing what's best, because these plants, they do so many things for us. So I know we said like no questions, but can I just ask a question of y'all real quick, just shout out a couple of answers? So how many different outposts can one plant provide? This is a mesquite from my backyard. So yell out some things that mesquites provide us. Shade.
Shelter.
Barbecue, yeah, wood, definitely. They're a nitrogen fixer, great. Well, most of the leguminous family is, so.
High protein
the beans. Yeah, definitely, high protein beans, so you can make flour out of the beans that they produce. So, yeah, those are all really great things that this one little plant provides, and it's one of my favorites, and I got lucky enough to have a thornless variety in my backyard.
That's awesome.
Okay, so, and the reasons we're using native plants in our permaculture garden, like I said, we're stacking those functions, and I think I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to Michelle, and she's going to talk to you about what functions these native plants can provide, and how we can use some examples of native plants to create our own permaculture.
Okay. So some really great reasons to use native plants in your permaculture garden. It's regionally appropriate. I don't have to, I'm preaching to the choir with that one. Of course you understand that it's regionally appropriate. Native plants are drought tolerant, they're disease resistant, they're food for wildlife, they're food for humans, and they're filling niches. And you know, what better teacher do we have than nature? And nature knows best. And each individual plant really is, just like Nadia illustrated with that mesquite tree, there are functions stacked with each species. And we'll talk about a few specific species as we get a little further into the presentation. And I want you to sort of remember this for the rest of the presentation. This is a genius list. I love this list. Formula for a plant guild. So when we're talking about plant guilds, we're talking about plants that we're putting together or incorporating together in a garden design because they work well together. They're each supplying each other with some sort of benefit. So remember that food forest, the layers of the food forest, the 7 layers, and how the different heights can all work together. So you don't have all your fruit trees in a row. A lot of commercial designs, they are designed that way because of mechanization. Well, in smaller plantings, we don't necessarily have to worry about mechanization, and so we really can mix it up a bit. Nitrogen fixers, y'all were spot on with that mesquite being a nitrogen fixer, and I have some plant examples that I'm going to give you. And I included a whole bunch of nitrogen fixers in that plant list. They're insectivories, so they may be host plants for butterfly larvae or other beneficial insects, and they may be great nectar plants for pollinators. They're nutrient binders. I think Nadia touched on that a little bit when she was talking about you know, your root crop, and if you're planting something that has a taproot, it's going deep down into the soil, it's pulling up nutrients, it's bringing those nutrients up into the leaves, and then when the leaves die, they're leaving those nutrients on top of the soil for the plants.
Dynamic accumulators.
Oh, that's right. I was like, leave that out, they're doing it lots. Dynamic accumulators, there's all kinds of fun permaculture terms, and so a lot of them are used you know, synonymously. There are mulch plants, and I'm going to talk a little bit about native grasses as mulch plants. They make great mulch plants. Nadia the other day when we were getting ready for this was talking about a woman that was using lemon balm for a mulch plant. She's cutting it down, she's using the leaves as mulch. You can also do that with your native bunch grasses. And then we included water for wildlife, and a good permaculture design is going to incorporate wise use of water. So somehow we need wildlife to be getting water from our design, whether you're including a pond, a bird bath, or you know, some way for wildlife to get water. So I did this quick and dirty design. This is my chicken scratch. And so this is you know, kind of my idea of a plant guild. There are so many different combinations that you can come up with for a plant guild. This is one example. So what I included here, I included a pecan tree. A pecan tree might be, if you're remembering your food forest layers, might be your top layer. So this could be something that you're planting, or it could be something that's existing on your property. Remember, you sat back in your hammock and you project is going to be for an entire year, and you saw that there was a native pecan tree. Well, you're going to go ahead and utilize that in your design. So maybe this was existing. So that's going to be your top layer. You can incorporate the native plants along with cultivated varieties. It doesn't have to be all native, but it can be. But that's the beauty of this. It really does provide a lot of opportunity for lots of different designs. So in this particular design, I included a methane plum, that's a cultivated variety, as a little bit more of an understory plant. I included a Swiss chard because that's kind of a perennial crop. And as the leaves die, you can cut back the leaves, leave them on top for mulch, or you can harvest. And the Swiss chard does really well as far as the green is concerned and throughout the San Antonio summer in a lot of cases, especially if it's getting a little bit of shade. So here's an understory plant. It may be getting a little bit of shade, and so it may be that it survives our summer. A wine cup. One of my favorites. I love wine cups. Well, I read that wine cups have kind of a tap root, so they could be one of those dynamic accumulators pulling nutrients up, and then the leaves die back at a certain time of the year because they're perennial and you don't necessarily have them year round. And then I included a block dahlia. That is a small shrub that's also a nitrogen fixer. We have a black dahlia that's doing really well at the Denver Heights Community Garden, and it's been there for years, and it doesn't get watered or anything. It's just, and it's lovely. It's absolutely lovely. It's covered with bees and butterflies. In this particular case, I included a blackfoot daisy, a great nectar plant, Lindheimer muley, a good example of a native grass that you may be able to cut back every spring. You can use the tops of that grass. You can leave it right where it is and mulch your plum tree. Okay, you don't have to take it and put it into a compost bin or stuff it into a trash bag. You can just leave it right where it is. Kidneywood, another one of my favorite natives, also a nitrogen fixer, has a really nice open habit. So if you're talking about including layers and doing understory plants, it can be an understory plant, but you can also put plants underneath it because of that growth habit. It'll still allow some of that sun to come through. I included Barbados cherry for the wildlife. Also heard that it's edible for humans as well. Maximilian sunflower, rumored to be very similar to the Jerusalem artichoke, and you all probably have more information about that than I do. I'm really curious, so if any of you know if that's actually true, let me know. Because Jerusalem artichoke is a plant that's used often in permaculture designs, if you look at permaculture designs around the world. But how wonderful would it be if we actually had a native plant that could replace a Jerusalem artichoke that may have issues growing here. Turk's cap, another one of my favorites. Sometimes you even just find it in your landscape along fence rows. It's great stuff. The hummingbirds love it. I've heard you can make a tea out of the flower. I also included a Texas persimmon. If you care for the fruit, then the fruit is edible right off the tree. A lot of people make jams and jellies out of it. And then of course, if humans don't get to it, the birds love it. And then you can always overseed with annuals. So in this case, I indicated to overseed with bluebonnet seed, nitrogen fixer, or white prairie clover, also nitrogen fixer. And then I included a non-native daikon radish to be that dynamic accumulator. It's a big taproot, can help break up that soil. So the plants that I have indicated here is in no way an exhaustive list of native plants that can be used. So I want you to think right now about every butterfly plant list that you've seen using native plants, every native plant list that you've seen. I want you to think about foraging, native plant foraging lists, all fair game, okay? So we only have an hour obviously a lot less than an hour now. So I'm going to just go through this fairly quickly. Pecan trees. Once again, native pecan trees are existing in the landscape, and it may be that that's your tall tree layer. From time to time, you may run into a native walnut. The black walnut is a native plant. Now, I hear it's a lot of work to get into a black walnut. So you may burn more calories trying to get into that walnut than is actually provided once you do get in. But you can call up Phoenix Nursery, see if there's a cultivated variety that you could use instead. But again, you can every so often find a black walnut in the native landscape. Mesquite tree, just like what Nadia was talking about. Great nitrogen fixer, and like I said, I've included a lot of nitrogen fixers here. There are mesquite trees at the Pittman-Sullivan Community Garden, which is a food forest. Those trees were existing. Obviously, we're stacking functions there. It actually is very, it's lost a lot of limbs, and so that wood, what could have been available to sell for barbecue, and then if you had the wherewithal to grind up the beans, of course you get the flour. Texas persimmon, one of my favorites, needs really good drainage, would be a great plant for the top of a berm. You heard Brian talking a little bit about berms and swales. I think that in San Antonio, if you're planting on top of a berm, you may have to pay attention to the better drainage because of that berm that you've created, and consider some of these native plants for the top of the berm because of the drainage. So I think a Texas persimmon would do really well. Eve's necklace. Eve's necklace is a great little plant, very nice, open, airy habit. Also a nitrogen fixer. Don't know much about the edibility of the pods or anything like that. Probably not, okay. But I know that the bees really like the flowers. And a lot of these are plants that we have used at community gardens, and they seem to be doing really well. So these are some of our tried and true. Also, there are probably lots of very obscure native plants, but many of the ones that I'm going to mention, or I am mentioning, they are available at some of your better stocked local nurseries. Ratama, also another nitrogen fixer, attracts bees. Nice open, airy habit, so that if you're planting understory, the sunlight can come through those leaves. This is a picture taken at Pittman-Sullivan Community Garden. This is Anacacha orchid tree, also part of the Fabaceae family, a nitrogen fixer. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Wildflower Research Center in Austin and their database, and you can go to their website and you can search their database by family. So if you look under the Fabaceae family, you're going to see, I think there are like 40 or more native plants under the Fabaceae family in that database. But when I was scrolling through, I saw very few of them that I ever saw available at a nursery or via seed. Mountain laurel, the sephoras are also Fabaceaes. Of course, the bees love those flowers. The difference between this and some of the other nitrogen fixing canopy layer trees is that this is evergreen. And so if you are looking at creating a multi-level garden, you might want to be careful if you do end up planting a mountain laurel. Even though they're slow growing, once there's something underneath a mountain laurel, you better hope that it was shade tolerant. because that dense foliage is going to kind of block out some of the sunlight in your design. Texas redbud, another nitrogen fixer. This is going to be another plant that's great for either your tall tree layer or that understory layer. Your understory layer can be your top layer if you don't have room in your design for a large tree. I've heard that the pods, if you get them very early, are edible.
And the flowers.
And the flowers. Thank you. Mexican plum. The picture that's on your left-hand side is taken at Denver Heights Community Garden. That garden is a probably 80% native plants. This is one of my favorite pictures of any of the community garden pictures. I planted that tree when it was teeny tiny, and now it's really big, and in the spring, it's covered with white flowers and bees and butterflies, and it smells delicious, and then it looks beautiful against that blue backdrop. So, of course, the Mexican plum has that fruit, and it's a little bit bitter, in my opinion, but if you can get used to that bitterness, then they're super good for you, and you can make jams and jellies out of that fruit. If you leave the fruit, then the birds love it too. Acacia. So there's a whole multitude of acacias that you can use in some of your designs, but you may want to use some of the shorter species. So acacia, I'm sorry, let me think. So it's acacia, it's catclaw acacia, and I think there's a variety called righty eye, and that one tends to be about 6 to 10 feet tall. So you may want to consider using a shorter acacia in your design if you're doing the multi-tiered levels. Kidney wood, another nitrogen fixer, as you can see, we've got a lot of great trees that can be used in a permaculture design to fix nitrogen. I included a Yopon holly because it's not food for us. Ilex vomitoria, not for us, but birds will eat it. It's not their first choice, but they will because we are planting food for wildlife as well. And then I've heard that the leaves have some caffeine in them, so people have made tea from the leaves. You probably noticed that there was a vine layer in the 7-layer garden. Okay, most of us don't want to put a vine next to a tree and let the vine grow up on the tree. That's opposite from what we were ever trained. And there are lots of beautiful native vines. So you've got your trumpet vine and your cross vine and Carolina jessamine, I think, is a native. And so these are all really strong, sturdy, invasive vines. They do what vines do. There's a couple of passion vines, though, that I've noticed grow as volunteers in a lot of gardens, and you will often see them kind of twining up a tree, but they never seem to me to look like they're really taking over that tree or that shrub. And so if you kind of keep an eye on it, it kind of just leans for a little while, and it's a great little plant that gets a bright red fruit. That fruit is edible. But prior to that, you may see those Gulf fritillary butterflies munching on those leaves. There's the block dahlia that I mentioned earlier on. Great little shrub. I'm not sure who might have this. Y'all, I haven't been to Medina Nursery yet, but hopefully I can make a trip up there someday.
Rainbow Gardens.
Rainbow Gardens has
Yes,
it?
they have it.
Yeah, okay, great. That's great to hear. There are a couple different sennas that I've seen grow very successfully. Another nitrogen fixer. Bees love it, butterflies love it. Great little growth habit for this particular plant. And you definitely want to keep in mind the mature growth for all of these plants and think about the mature growth in regards to your design. Agarita, you want to carefully place Agarita, but it's one of my favorites. I love it. It's another situation where by the time I get done beating it with a stick, and it hasn't been worth it for a handful of berries, I don't know. But if you keep at it, you really can make a really delicious jelly with it. The bees love it. The birds love the fruit. I have a screen planting in front of my bay windows for security.
Security, yeah. If you're into like medicinal plants, it's really good medicinal as well.
Of course, your prickly pear. Probably planting the least spiny varieties of prickly pear. The fruit, of course, is edible. The pads are edible. And they grow quite readily here, so why not make it easy on yourself? There's the Maximilian sunflower. Also just one of my favorites, seems to grow really well. Probably a little too well for some people. But if you've got some to share, let me know. The Turk's cap. The native bunch grasses that I mentioned earlier. Consider using the native bunch grasses for lots of reasons. If you are creating a slope with a berm, you may want to hold that soil in by planting some native bunch grasses in that berm. They have a lovely fibrous root system, and again, dynamic accumulator. You can use those leaves when you cut them back every spring for mulch. Greg's dahlia. You know, when I worked in Austin, I used to see this a lot. So if y'all have any information about this, I'm not sure who has this, but we sold it quite a bit at the nursery that I worked at that had a lot of native plants, and I thought it was so attractive. So this is another nitrogen fixer, but in this case, this could be used as sort of your ground cover layer, and especially if you're working on a berm and you have that well-drained situation again, probably the top of the berm is going to be the best place for it rather than down in the swale where it's going to have wet feet from time to time. White prairie clover grows readily from seed. So again, these are things that you can find. So I haven't told you about anything that's so rare that you won't be able to find it, but definitely be playing around with some of your knowledge, your native plant knowledge. I bet you a lot of you have a lot more knowledge about native plants than I do. And think about how you can use some of those rare things in a design. And if it works, you need to communicate and let us know so we can add it to our plant list. Bluebonnets, of course. I know some people are real sticklers about using the right variety in the right area of Texas. As a master naturalist, we learned that. I guess the hard way, I don't know. Nitrogen fixers, again in the Fabaceae family. They're beautiful. People always associate the bluebonnets with an attractive space or an open space. And then the wine cups again, another one of my favorites. Purslane, okay, so you may be able to find purslane in a nursery and the variety that's edible. But also think about, like I said, those foraging species, because a lot of people are going to say, well, the weeds are native, and yes, they are. So do they have a place in your permaculture design? Perhaps they do. So learn how to identify them, know which ones to keep, know which ones to get rid of, and utilize those great underutilized natives.
Yeah, so I just wanted to go over the last couple of principles to keep in mind. So apply self-regulation and accept feedback. And so yeah, you're like, what are those pictures doing here? This doesn't have anything to do with my garden. I mean, basically, these are some larger scale examples of people as a society not doing this, not accepting feedback and applying self-regulation. We're doing these things that are, you know, they're not working, but we're continuing to use them. We're continuing to grow monoculture crops and to spray pesticides and to farm chickens and capos and all of these like really bad practices. So, you know, please don't do that with your garden. If something's not working, if it's not regionally appropriate, even if you hear about it in a permaculture class or in a permaculture book, like Michelle mentioned earlier, it's not always appropriate for this region. So, you know, listen to nature and you know, listen to what it's telling you and be able to change and to adapt and to modify what you're doing. And last, I want to leave you with use small and slow solutions. This is one of my favorite permaculture principles. Because often when we find out about all of this great knowledge and information, we want to go out there and we want to go crazy with it and we want to design our whole yard. And we can often get overwhelmed by all of these things, and then you're not attaining a yield because you're, you know, running yourself ragged trying to create this thing when really, you know, you should just take it one step at a time. You know, come up with your overall general design and then, you know, bite it off in little bite-sized pieces so that you're not overwhelmed. And as Lao Tzu says, nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. So, you know, remember that for your own design, because we're all part of nature too. So here are some resources that we used. There's Gaia's Garden, Permaculture Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability, the Designer's Manual, the book. And all of these awesome websites from A&M, from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. That was my main resource, you know, when researching native plants. It's just awesome. So, yeah. And oh, look, Native Plant Society of Texas, yay! And this is our information. You know, go ahead and jot it down and look us up on the internet.